Attitudinal healing, as you may know, is active in 30 countries around the world. I've been involved in leading attitudinal healing workshops and starting groups in 9 different countries, besides the United States, in a number of countries in the former Soviet Union, as well as in India, Mongolia, and China. And so I know from my own experience that attitudinal healing is really very universal. It has universal applicability no matter what the country or what the culture. And many times if you go into another country, people will say, well, it's not in our cultural tradition for people to sit in a group with strangers and hold hands and talk about what their innermost feelings are. And yet, if people are given a chance to speak up, speak their truth in a safe space without judgment and with acceptance and love, almost everybody avails themselves of that because we all have that yearning for healing and for joining. And I want to tell you a short story about an experience I had in Uzbekistan. Some years ago, I was invited to Uzbekistan to give a training for 40 doctors, psychologists, and social workers who were working with young women who were at risk for suicide. Uzbekistan, after the breakdown or the falling apart of the Soviet Union, had returned to a very patriarchal tradition of marrying off girls at a very young age, 13, 14, 15, 16, at which time the young girls left their family home, moved in with the husband's family, and then came completely under the thumb of the husband and the mother-in-law and father-in-law. And it was very much within the Uzbek tradition for the mother-in-law to be a tyrant and treat the bride as almost a slave. So a lot of young girls, teenagers really, who had no tools for how to deal with this very difficult situation, found themselves in such despair and in such desperation that they turned to suicide. So there'd been a wave of suicides and attempted suicides. So these 40 doctors and social workers and psychologists were there to work on this problem. What could they do? So they asked me to come in and do a training. It was not specifically an attitudinal healing training, but I said, what you folks need is attitudinal healing, and what you need is support groups for these young women. And they said, well, come and do us this training and tell us about support groups. And I said, well, I can't tell you about a support group, you have to see it. So I said, gather some of the young women that you're working with. And they said, oh, no, they won't talk. And I said, well, just give them an invitation to come and we'll see what happens. So the day of the group meeting, where in the middle of our training, we had a large room like this with 40 seats set up in a large circle where all the attendees were sitting, and then a small circle in the middle where I was sitting with 7 of these young women who had come. And as we walked into the room, the head doctor whispered in my ear, they've all told me they're scared to death and nobody's going to open their mouth. And I said, that's okay. So we sat in the circle, these 7 young women and I, we held hands, I did a joining, we read the principles. I said, everyone here is experiencing something similar to what you're going through, and I thought you might be able to help each other. You may be able to share your experiences and find something in common, in some ways to help each other. And over the next hour and a half, every girl in that circle opened her heart, talked about all the suffering that she was going through, and there were many, many tears shed. And one of the girls spoke up and said, it's such a relief to find out I'm not alone. I had no idea that other people were going through just what I'm going through. And I'm just so glad to be with other people. I have no one else to talk to in my life. So to me, that just speaks of no matter what the cultural norms are, there's this universal need and hunger and yearning for joining with other people, connecting and finding healing and supporting each other in that healing.